they were there to contribute as well and listen to them. But nevertheless, I tried to summarize the key highlights of their discussions. The four speakers were Mr. Montemayor, Hang Zo, Keith Dawson, who's in front, and forgot someone. DeFranca. Sorry, Mr. DeFranca. Okay, so what did they all talk about? Really, as a prelude to that, there were really two adverse effects as a result of the 2007-8 price spikes and volatility. First adverse effect was that there was loss in the confidence of trade. In fact, many governments blame the liberalization of trade, thus resulting to the price spikes and volatility. Ironically, very few people know that during the 2007 and 8, there wasn't really any food or rice shortage. It was low stock-to-use ratio, but generally there wasn't any. So the major, effect of the price trade was really much due to the protectionist policies that were induced by both exporting and importing countries, particularly in the rice sector. That was one of the adverse effects. The second adverse effect, but it can also be turned into an opportunity, according to our speaker, is the shift of the tendency or the shift of our rich financial resource, but very highly import-dependent countries to look for land that can produce their needs, their food security needs for their countries. And the way they looked at it was to look at the potential arable land that's available in less developed countries. Then the third aspect of our two other speakers was to say, Asia can benefit from the experiences and lessons learned outside of Asia. So in fact, we had very rich country cases. One of them was Brazil. The other to Keith Dawson, discussed about a motley of country cases from Cuba to Ukraine to Egypt and Sudan. Now, how did we do that? But really, let me just try to distill the key points that came out of that discussion. Montemayor discussed trade, and basically he said at the end of the day, trade actually works, despite the bloopers in 2007 and 8. And in fact, he was saying the food trade actually increased from 2007 to the present. Ideally, the best way to ensure and foster trade is if we could have a completion of the Doha round. Remember, in the first day, there was a question that was posed. Can we finalize it? Can we complete it? Or do we have to declare it as a failure? Mr. Montemayor's point of view was to say, it looks like it's going to be difficult for us to complete the Doha round within the time frame of 2011, because even what they call the quick harvest or the less politically sensitive areas are now quite already politically volatile as well. So what's the second best? He was looking at there are still opportunities, and opportunities are in fact among and between less developed countries, and which I call South-South trade. The second topic was about land grabbing or land investment, if you make it less derogatory and more diplomatic, in surplus areas. Now, among the four cases, that was apparently the most emotional and most controversial of the different topics. Our speaker expertly handled it by saying, look, this is how the surplus, the food import dependent countries but rich resource areas are looking at it. They want to develop the land areas of less developed economies. It could be an adverse effect, but it can also be a win-win opportunity. He took the latter viewpoint. He said that there are win-win opportunities for it, but it's going to be challenging because of the less developed economies. He emphasized two country cases, Indonesia and that of Cambodia. We know that governance is weak and the land use and entrepreneurial rights are also not in place. And even if they were in place, of course, implementation would be difficult. So what are the policy options? Before we go into the policy options, we also looked at the country cases. And very strikingly, from the country cases, you can actually see that in Brazil, for example, what worked was that they invested in agriculture early on the day. They invested and worked on 3 areas, in fact, and now which are daunting problems for us, the problems of the food, fuel, water nexus. And the key point there was, of course, a lot of political commitment, a lot of resources that in fact the government provided. Similarly, in the context of the other countries, the key point that Dalton were discussing was that actually farmers, he called them, are global peacekeepers. In fact, if you give them the right investments, whether in the form of infrastructure, conducive policy and institutional arrangement, the private sector, including the small-scale farmers who are in fact private sector, will actually unleash their potential to become profitable ventures. So as a result of that, we came out, or at least I distilled, 3 policy directions for investments for food security. And by the way, there was emphasis also that food security is an intermediary outcome. The real impact that we really need to see is income security. Because if people, the population, whether they're rural or urban sector, if they have the income, the income to provide for their resources, for their food, for their clothing, for their shelter, we'll look at food security as secondary objective. The major aspect is to look for income security. So we've distilled 3 policy directions. The directions were in the context of what are the low-hanging fruits. Because I mean, if you go for research and development and science-based, true, that should be the long-term direction. But really, what we need are immediate positive results or concrete results. So low-hanging fruits, those that will impact small-scale farmers, and those that will contribute both to food and result to ensuring income security. So I distilled 3 investment opportunities. The first one, it doesn't look sexy at all, but that's the necessity at the moment. The first order of the day is invest in agriculture and food sector. That's what we found out in country cases outside of Asia, and that's what is essentially needed in Asia as well. Where are the areas where investment should go? It should go into improving productivity of small-scale farmers. R&D is important. Bridging the yield gap between optimum and actual is another area. And post-harvest technologies, like the SI called waste reduction, are all low-hanging fruits. The second area for investment in agriculture and food sector is enhance the value chain development and connectivity. This day and age that we're all interconnected, integration of the food supply chain from the farming sector to the processing, to the distribution, and to the final markets are key. That requires, of course, market infrastructure such as roads, air, seaports, and the like, and of course, warehouses and cold storage. The third area is increased resilience for natural and economic shocks. At the end of the day, because of the climate change, more and more we need risk management tools. The second area of investment opportunities for food security is foster South-South trade at sub-regional, and there was emphasis on the, for example, Greater Mekong, ASEAN plus 3 countries, Asia-Pacific, Asia. You can name a variety of sub-regional, as well as regional. That means Asian emerging markets with Africa, with South America, and the like. That this should encourage innovative mechanisms of reaping low-hanging fruits, like regional reserve, for example, market information and sharing and intelligence is key, and innovative financing mechanisms in the directions of public-private partnerships. The third area is to develop regional advocacy and watchdog role. This one I distilled from the audience discussion. That will be responsible for agricultural land investments or code of conduct on land grabbing for win-win institutional arrangements. An example is, I think, the WWF, which was really quite, it developed a carrot and stick type of arrangement. But here, it's really to use the social networks. I mean, in this day and age, that's the best way to package the advocacy tool through use of what I call information technology and communication. Multi-stakeholder advocacy, and here we mean bringing in all the stakeholders in the value chain, if you look at it, from agribusiness to civil society, and even the development organizations. The third is important, which is building and assisting good governance through capacity and institutional development. And here we provided, we called on, that's the meaning of attention, the International Development Organization. IFAD, FAO was there, and of course myself, ADP. Thank you very much. That's in the gist.